This is Changemakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
This week's Changemaker is Grace Ruiz-Stepter, the Director of Housing and Community Development for the City of Anaheim. Grace is a highly accomplished housing programs executive with over 20 years of experience overseeing federal and local initiatives to provide affordable housing. Prior to joining Anaheim, Grace held leadership roles managing housing programs at the Housing Authority of Los Angeles County. Grace, welcome to Changemakers.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm glad you're here, and we have a wide variety of topics that I want to cover. Let's just start talking about the 20 years managing housing programs and maybe tell us how you got started, what inspired you to choose this path, and just kind of that general on-ramp into the industry.
Sure. Let me start by apologizing and saying that now it's as I was reflecting last week, I had an all hands meeting here with all my staff. It's actually getting closer to 30 years.
That's great.
And quite a journey. I've listened to some of your other guests, and I think the one thing that I have in common with them is I think we all share this kind of we fell into housing. We didn't choose it as some people say, I want to go into medicine, or I want to go into law. Housing is just one of those careers that isn't prominently known, and so people don't intentionally pick it up. But once you dip your toe into it, and you start to do some meaningful work, it really just grabs a hold of you, and it becomes a lifelong journey. And I think that is really resounds with me, and I think is the same as I would describe my journey. Coming out of college, my forethought was that I wanted to do something in social work. And so my first real grown-up job, as we might call it, was working as a case manager in the South Central Los Angeles area for a nonprofit that helped pregnant and parenting teenage girls. And so as part of that journey, my main task was really to help these young ladies to find whatever it took to help them really elevate from the position that they found themselves in, that required finding things like subsidized childcare, helping with, in some cases, college applications, getting them into workforce training type of programs. And within that realm of helping folks, housing was one of the things that often reared its ugly head as something that people needed. And so through that experience is where I even came to know what housing was. It was the first time that I was introduced to the Housing Choice Voucher Program, what it does, how it assists people. And so I had to help my clients navigate that system. And so through that process, I learned a little bit about what housing was, really from a consumer point of view, of helping my clients to get on waiting lists, fill out applications, and then really understanding what that wait process might look like.
Isn't it unique and just so uplifting that so many people start this industry with truly wanting to help people?
Absolutely. I think that people that stay in this journey, that's a common theme. I've met many professionals. One of the things that I did later in life, once I really became entrenched and started on a career and a professional path, that I joined a couple of professional organizations here locally in California. I belong to the California Association of Housing Authorities. At one point, even served as the statewide president. And I've also been involved now for quite some time with NARO, the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. And that networking and the people that I find there, that's the common bond. I think unilaterally, you find people that have dedicated their careers to this, even folks who have retired and just keep coming back. We often say, and I certainly believe that, we're at many regards, we're extremely fortunate to be able to provide for our families and a career that provides meaning every day for the work that we do. I'm sure that, there are other careers like that, but I think the uniqueness of housing is that we know what the need is and we can see how what we do every day matters.
Before we get into the specifics about Anaheim, let's talk about NARO. You mentioned your involvement there, and you were just recently sworn in as the National Chair for Community and Revitalization. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm super excited about serving the next 2 years. I've been involved now for this is my fourth term. And I started as an appointee for this NARO Pacific Southwest Regional Chapter. And mainly, I think that because of my dual role in Anaheim, I happen to have oversight of both our Housing Choice Voucher Program, in addition to other non-traditional roles for a housing director, which is all of our federal entitlement programs. I run our workforce division, and I also oversee our affordable housing production. So in many ways, my role here in Anaheim is community revitalization, using the tools that are available through the Housing Authority, but also tools that are available much broader from a city perspective. And so the work of the CR&D committee is, as we move forward for the next 2 years, is really going to be about really exploring how housing is more than just buildings or structure. It's about, we look holistically at communities. And I think back to the Hope 6 programs, neighborhood improvement programs. That is really what we're doing. We're not just building affordable housing. We're attempting to do things on a wholesale basis to uplift communities. A lot of housing authorities are doing that independent of the funding that's coming from the state or the federal government. It's the way we think. And so a lot of the members on CR&D have expressed that. They've expressed a desire to really elevate that messaging and to showcase the things that we're doing. Because in some ways, housing authorities tend to be some of the nation's best kept secrets. We do a lot of terrific work, but it's not as prominently known. So through CR&D and through NARO, we're hoping to start a little bit at a time to showcase all the work that's being done every single day throughout this nation.
Those are some good key initiatives for the next few years. So that's something to be particularly excited about. And at the recent NARO convention in New Orleans, you were also on a panel talking about affordable housing and some, I believe it was motel conversions. Why don't you go through some of those conversations and give us an update, because it's a very interesting inclusion into the discussion for affordable housing.
Yes, so I was. Thank you for bringing that up. I was on a panel with colleagues that I respect tremendously throughout California. Kit Dial from San Diego, Michelle Dozier from Sacramento. We were moderated by Preston Prince up in Santa Clara now. And we were talking about motel conversions, and the theme of our panel was the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the reason we named it that was that we really wanted to be transparent about the pros and the cons of what we're experiencing. So in California, motel conversions have really become a way to attempt to bring affordable housing online very quickly. And that's a result of the fact that I think it's pretty broadly known that we have quite a significant homeless population. I think the last count showed that roughly 50% of the nation's homeless are in California, with a very high percentage of them being in the Southern California region, where Orange County lays, we're between Los Angeles and San Diego. And so about 3 years ago or so, as a result of the state surplus, the governor put out a very innovative program called the Home Key Program, which allowed for jurisdictions to apply directly to the state for funds to acquire motels and quickly transform them into permanent supportive housing. And so many of us have taken advantage of that. We've applied to the state for home key funds, and we've been on a mission to buy motels, work with our nonprofit partners. In some cases, some housing authorities are developing themselves. In my case, I work with nonprofit housing partners to bring those forward. But it's about really going out to look at motels that are still in reasonable working condition, but can quickly provide housing for folks that are on our streets today. And so in the good, bad, and the ugly, a lot of the conversation was about the fact that motels offer a really good opportunity to buy a product that is already online, that offers a quick win in terms of maybe it only needs some rehab, and you can open the doors very quickly. The bad could be that sometimes you do have to be quite strategic about what you buy. Every motel isn't necessarily right for conversion, particularly into permanent supportive housing, because of the fact that you always need some space for nonprofit on-site service providers. So there are some motels that may be too small, or maybe just have not seen the kind of upkeep that one would want over the years. And so perhaps the investment would require a complete teardown. So it would take much more time to bring online and maybe more financial resources than we really want. And those are things that I think as housing authorities, we've had to get smart about in terms of really assessing properties for those things. How large are the units? Some motel rooms may be too small, and that's a function of they're intended for temporary stays. But when you're converting a motel to somebody's potential long-term home, things like storage, kitchenettes, where do I go out to take a mental break from a small room? That meaning the amenities that might be either already available or built into a motel. And all of those things are both opportunities and challenges. We've covered some pools in order to create community buildings and add some landscaping to make sure that a motel becomes viable long term. And then the ugly really is just that, sometimes even after our due diligence, we get in there and we find out that there's some things either structurally or otherwise that we didn't quite anticipate. And so then we're blowing out our budgets and we're having to figure that out. But the one thing that I think that we've all learned unilaterally is, that it is definitely an opportunity when methodically thought out with careful attention to social services and an understanding that because the units are small, you have to create spaces for people to come out and connect with each other, to have, a place to mentally download. And when all of that is in place, it could really be a great opportunity. And so in Anaheim, we've been doing it for some time. I'd like to take a minute to actually toot our own horn in that we working with our planning department, we actually adopted a local motel ordinance ahead of the Home Key program, working with our planning department, which set the stage for us to be able to do this very quickly, meaning motels are normally a commercial property. So in most cities, you have to go through a land use change, and that could take time and money. So working with our planning department, we had already set the landscape for being able to do that quickly. The beauty of the Home Key program at the state level was that was incorporated into the money that was given to jurisdictions, was a lot of state deregulation that could be applied at the local level to get this going very quickly. So it has been a new foray for us, a lot of learning, and it's something that we continue to use as one of our tools in the toolbox for bringing forth permanent supportive housing as quickly as we can.
This is a very creative inclusion at solving the affordability crisis. And I like how you guys are addressing everything from zoning to, infrastructure, sustainability, and property reuse. I'm curious, are there other regulatory issues? You mentioned the zoning, but as far as if you're putting subsidy into the units, are you seeing any kind of waivers that you have to get for compliance or any of the other pieces that you've had to package with these deals?
Well, certainly, attention to ADA. We have had to convert several units into more adaptable, not particularly some of our older buildings, but we're not waiving that. We're actually making those adjustments, and that's creating some costs, which still is the right thing to do. We have worked with our fire department on some accessibility issues and just being more adaptable in how we move forward. And so I think, from a land use perspective, I think allowing from the use to go from commercial to residential is probably the largest land use hurdles. But then there are other city departments, to ensure that that doesn't become an obstacle. One of the luxuries I have here at the City of Anaheim is that I'm also a department head. So the fire department, the police department, and what have you, those conversations are really needed and they're necessary. I was unaware that actually one of the properties that we bought, it was already being used as de facto affordable housing, but our fire department was being called there quite often for drug issues. And so they were actually one of my biggest cheerleaders when I bought the property. But one of the things they insisted on was the property management be available and open to communication with them, which often happens in affordable housing, regardless. So I wouldn't consider that necessarily a barrier, but an opportunity to bridge with departments that are already coming to these properties. Our police department was coming to some of our properties, the motels that we bought. And so that partnership has really strengthened management on site and just the security, because sometimes there could be community opposition to these types of developments with neighboring communities feeling like, well, I'm okay with it when it's a motel and somebody's just stopping by, but now you're converting and you're bringing in an element. One of the things that most people in the affordable housing world know is that we're constantly dealing with the not in my backyard syndrome. But the inclusion of the police and the fire department as key partners, advising what was already happening on the site and how inserting professional management services and their presence and their partnership with that, how all of that really helps to elevate and improve the conditions that might have been at the motel. All of those are things that, if done correctly, can really help the process move quicker. Because that's probably one of the things that can be a challenge is community opposition. The Home Key program from the state does have a much shorter community outreach requirement, but nonetheless, I think as housing authorities and as cities and as neighbors, of course, we do want that community input. We want it to be well received. So regardless of whether or not the community input process, some of our funding sources have been minimized, we still do it quite extensively.
You've been talking about a lot of intergovernmental relations here and really emphasizing the importance of how housing providers have to work with city offices and different areas that are sometimes non-traditional. Do you have other examples you want to share of how you've had to partner to benefit housing programs?
Certainly. In other arenas, we just opened up one of our latest affordable housing developments. It's called Fenimore Place. Once again, here with our planning department, we're working with trying to be use some innovation and have our affordable housing developments be more, serve more community serving. The planning department did work with us so that we were able to insert a medical clinic, a child guidance center, and a Head Start program into one of our newest developments in a way that really is non-intrusive to our living units. So through that partnership, they helped us with writing a local ordinance that is all about inserting what we call auxiliary facing community benefits within our affordable housing developments. Previously, that would not have been allowed because it was mixing up residential and commercial uses. But that understanding of just that affordable housing could be many things really helped that partnership come to fruition. And so now that neighborhood, which is an impacted neighborhood, has the benefit of a neighboring local serving. It's smaller, but nonetheless a clinic from one of our local medical providers where you could do regular checkups. The Child Guidance Center is really a mental health counseling institute for children. They have a large presence in Anaheim, but did not have a clinic in they had a large presence in Orange County, but didn't have one in Anaheim. So this really was something that we were super excited to bring forward. And the Head Start program there, that helps our residents on site. The building is 102 units of tax credits So by definition, we do have a lot of working families there, but it's in an impacted neighborhood right outside of our stadium. So the bringing of all of that really was something we were excited about. And so it was both our planning department, it was our fire department wanting, being okay and being flexible with saying, okay, we'll work with you on how we review the uses and the emergency exits and all of the other requirements, given the fact that you have blended uses here. The fire department actually was a significant partner just to get us to the finish line in terms of when we needed to have things ready for the property to be leased. There was a couple of fire inspections that needed to really be done in an expedited manner. And because of that partnership, they went out every day, sometimes twice a day, to get us to that finish line. So it's some of those intangibles. Another property that we had some sewer constraints. And so had to work with our public works department to really work through that, find alternative solutions that were both cost effective but safe. And again, because we have the benefit of those partnerships, they're partners that are willing to help work with us on how to find solutions. I know I hear stories sometimes in other jurisdictions where that relationship isn't there. So it costs time and money, both for the housing authority and whether you're the developer yourself or whether you're using a nonprofit developer as your partner. But those relationships are just key. I think circling back to them to let them know what was produced, to thank them along the way for how they were helpful, helping them to see the mission. I think much like we in affordable housing, we're drawn into the mission and the ability to help folks. Sometimes people who are in our planning departments and our public works department, they don't see the fruits of their labor all the way to the end. And so us being able to share, this is what we build and this is who we built it for, really does help to create those strong partnerships.
Those are great examples of synergy, and it paints a picture of how things really should work. Grace, prior to moving to Anaheim, you served in leadership positions with the Housing Authority of Los Angeles County. For those less familiar with Anaheim, it is situated roughly 20 miles south of the city of Los Angeles. So given your previous experience in LA, a region facing considerable housing challenges, are you observing similar housing affordability issues and shortages there in Anaheim?
Thank you for that question. In Anaheim, our challenges are probably very similar to some of our other urban cores in that there's just simply not enough affordable housing. Our rents have not kept pace with wages, and therefore it's really created this pressure point on affordable housing for us to produce as many units as possible and as in an expedited manner as we possibly can. My work here in Anaheim right now is really about setting the stage for the next 10 years in terms of having an active pipeline with realistic numbers, identifying where that money is going to come from. California, once upon a time, Anaheim was a very robust redevelopment agency. We had set up portions of our city that had seen some blight and invested. And so as a result of that, we had a decent amount of tax increment money coming back to our redevelopment agency. And under state law, 30% of that was coming to housing. And the 30% was because we had extended how long our redevelopment areas would be in existence. So that kicked off something like $17 million for housing investment every single year. That went away in 2011 as a result of some state lawsuits between redevelopment agencies and the city. So the last several years have really been about how do we find other money to keep us innovating and building at the pace that we were building prior or during the redevelopment days. And so the state has come forward with a couple of funding sources, nowhere near what redevelopment was, but we're still thankful for it, in the form of a tax on a fee on recordings of changes in properties, which now is starting to kick off some money. So that's one source of money. Obviously, we take advantage of the Light Tech program, probably like every other large housing authority in our state and in the nation. But we're also looking to how do we create local funds. We happen to be parked in a place where there is a large amusement park, a couple of sports teams and what have you, and now some larger Four Diamond hotel products. And we are all in conversations about how does this economic engine that Anaheim is so blessed with, how do we now use and harness the energy of all of these big engines to also help with affordable housing? So those conversations are very promising, and we're in the very early discussions are around how do we form a local housing trust fund, which I know exists in many jurisdictions. And so we're certainly won't be recreating the wheel. We'll be borrowing ideas from other folks, I think, but the number of stakeholders at the table who want to be a part of it, who may be willing to contribute, may be a little bit more unique. And it's something that we're really looking to take full advantage of. We've really keeping an eye also on emerging needs throughout California. I think a lot of us have really paid a lot of attention to the fact that homelessness is a real issue for us. We can't ignore it. We really need to be about trying to solve that. But sometimes when you have a crisis of this nature, there's a bit of a temptation to take your eye off the ball of other things just because the homelessness is such a great issue and requires all hands on deck. But other things that we really need to pay attention to and are paying attention to is affectionately known as the silver tsunami. We know that folks that are retiring and now that retirement check isn't enough to keep up with rent. So really trying to get into the space of trying to come up with some creative ideas about how we help seniors stay in place, whether that be in a rental situation or even in a homeownership situation. We are finding seniors that are struggling even when they're homeowners.
Are there several categories that you're actually seeing the need is, or is it just sort of all over the place?
We have a need in almost every spectrum of housing. Young folks who've gone to college, done all the right things, cannot afford to own a home in California. So that's one piece of the pie that we are trying to come up with solutions for. We have what we call our missing middle, which is those folks that are working and still struggling to pay rent. Those are populations that we care about and we're trying to come up with tools for. But I think the ones that we're critically aware of and working a little bit more feverishly around is that senior population. So here in Anaheim, we have created a new program called our Senior Safety Net program, cobbling together funding from different sources to pay for case management, to pay for short-term instances of up to $5,000, maybe falling behind with rent, either because of a medical bill or some other unforeseen circumstances. So that is, in essence, an eviction diversion type of a program, because sometimes that's enough to keep somebody stable. But within that, continuing also using the resources that come to us from our home program to stand up a tenant-based rental assistance program that will help seniors gain access to rent assistance for 24 months while we help them to figure out whether we can transition them into the Section 8 program or maybe one of our project-based voucher buildings or a tax credit buildings, or maybe family steps in or roommate situation works out, a whole multitude of things that could happen. But I think to your question right now, the population that we're laser focused in addition to the homeless, is our seniors, because we're seeing that the demographics show that the largest demographic of homeless that is increasing is our senior population.
What kind of numbers are we talking about within that senior population, or projections over the next, 1 year, 5 year, 10-year terms? Have you guys done studies to give an indication?
I don't have precise numbers on that. I know that our last point in time count showed a 10 to 15% increase in our homeless population at the age demographic. That was 55.
Okay. Yeah.
And the anecdotal information that I have, which is really what's causing, this sense of urgency within us, is that we do run a local shelter, 325 beds. That's our Anaheim specific shelter. And then regionally, there's a county shelter of about the same amount of beds, and a neighboring city has another shelter similar. So combined, about 1,000 beds of shelter. And when we get together and we talk as service providers, we are routinely talking to each other about the fact that we are seeing people who are older. And when I mean older, I'm talking about 50, I'm not talking 50s, so we're talking about 70 and 80 showing up at our shelters, and in some cases in wheelchairs and what have you. So while the data is emerging, and certainly our next point in time count will really probably be the most informative in terms of what that increase looks like, we are seeing it every day in our shelters.
It's so concerning to kind of hear this. I think you called it the silver tsunami. Do you have access to land and builders and nonprofits, and are you guys doing all of that yourself?
So land is scarce. We are largely built out, which is why something like a motel conversion ordinance and money for motels is such a promising model, because you can take things that you can repurpose what's there. So currently, we've been focused on housing our homeless with permanent supportive housing, but motels can potentially offer a model also for some of our seniors that are aging in place, as long as there is room to create some community space for the socialization and maybe for bringing on the services on site. So we're certainly looking at motels as an option for this population as well. The Housing Authority has, when we can, we do assemble land. We do own about 5 or 6 parcels that have been acquired over time, and we do actively engage in assembling land to make sure that it's viable. And so some things move quicker than others because we're waiting on willing sellers to make land larger. Here in Anaheim, we don't develop ourselves. We use nonprofit partners. And so our nonprofit partners certainly are quite innovative and often bring us sites that they believe may be useful, whether it be for our seniors or for our families, whatever need we have. But there's quite a landscape of nonprofit developers in Orange County, but really up and down the Southern California area that understand the need of the regions and are helping us to identify opportunities.
You have such an impressive array of things that you're doing, everything from homeless response care to development to managing several federal programs and doing it so well. When I was reading your bio and your information, there was one particular thing that stood out to me amongst all of the accomplishments, but this was a unique one, talking about some fraud prevention programs that you've created. Do you mind sharing some of those practices? Because it's sort of that ugly, I think you mentioned it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yes. And it's not something that always we're willing to talk about, but it sounds like you guys have done some great initiatives here, and I want to share that with our larger audience.
Sure. So that stems from my career path. When I initially started, my first foray into housing was through the Section 8 program. I was a caseworker. So I think when you're trained to do eligibility, to collect data income and really look at it with an intention of helping people, but also to ensure that we're being good stewards of the public's money. And so that was the initial start of that. But I happen to have been around long enough where I remember the introduction of the EIB system, the Enterprise Income Verification System, and what a revolution that was, right? And I was at the LA County Housing Authority, which is a pretty sizable agency. And we decided that we would let everybody know through very simplistic type of messaging that, hey, these electronic computer matches are coming online. And so you may be hearing from us, hopefully not, but we may need to work on you on some of that. And I think our matches that came back in the EIV days of where we had discrepancies was in the thousands, some small, some large. And so it was such a behemoth that we had to really strategize about, okay, how much matters? What's really the big numbers, and how do we approach that? And so I happened to be there when we were thinking through that. It was put on my lap to develop a team to really come up with strategies for all of that. And so that's has stayed with me, that, some of the things that come up as discrepancies, there's an explanation to it. And so you approach the family with dignity and respect, and you just have the conversation, and then that gets resolved. But then there are those other things that really and truly they're fraudulent activity. There's just no other way to describe them. And the advent of the EIV kind of, I think, opened the eyes of many of us of the fact that, as we come from a place of help, that sometimes, there's some folks that are working a little harder to maybe not be as transparent as we would like them to be. And so that really became the start for setting up fraud prevention programs that I've carried with me through my various assignments, at Memphis, now in Anaheim. And it really is about looking at a file holistically, collecting the data, letting the data tell the story, and then working with the family to work through that. We have enjoyed a partnership here, once again, with the Anaheim Police Department, where the police department will help to follow up on big cases, big fraud cases that our staff has uncovered from the perspective of trying to recover some money. That is difficult. We've only been successful in recovery in the cases where things have been quite substantial. Maybe going back about a decade, substantial would have meant something in the vicinity of $30,000 or more. Now, because everybody is so busy, including courts, it has to be more than $50,000 for our DA to take that and prosecute that. Thankfully, there's not a lot of that. I think now that people understand that there is computer matching or what have you, people are more forthcoming about their information. The place that's been a little bit of a challenge for us certainly has been, I guess it's the gig economy, the Ubers, the Uber Eats and what have you, where people are making some money and they're not always forthcoming with that. And we find that usually through bank accounts. We don't try to micromanage folks, but there's a way to look at bank account statements pretty quickly and see that money's coming in and out in an unexplained manner. And so there may be money somewhere else. And so we're not afraid to ask those questions. So that's really how we're handling those things.
It has been great talking with you here. And as we wrap up, is there anything else you want to bring forward on the good things you guys are doing over in Anaheim?
No, I thank you for the time. It isn't always, we don't always make time to talk about all the great things that we're doing. And I thank you for standing up a platform where we are able to talk about these things, and hopefully, gain an audience that understands that there's a lot of people working really hard to try to make an impact on some pretty big issues.
Completely agree. It has been a pleasure having you here, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Changemakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.